Live from the BDN Studios, it's Bang and Dang.
That's awesome.
If you don't like that, then
You ain't black.
All right, we're back. Battles of American Civil War Behind the Battles. Fresh off of the Emancipation Proclamation, and it's fair to say this guy, he didn't like that at all.
no.
Earl Van Dorn, and you know what else he didn't like? Getting killed for messing around with a judge's wife. He didn't even get killed in battle. Talking about Earl Van Dorn, Major General, United States Army officer. He also led 2 defenses of a Native American settlement from the Comanche. Then he joined the Confederate forces in 1861 after the war broke out, before he was killed in a private conflict, which we will get to, obviously. First, we got to go back all the way to the early 1800s in Claiborne County, Mississippi. That's where old Earl Van Dorn was born, near the town of Port Gibson, September 17th, 1820. His parents, Sophia Donaldson Caffrey and Peter Aaron Van Dorn. Sophia, she wasn't an ordinary Southern woman. She was actually a niece of President Andrew Jackson by way of marriage. Look at her. Her husband, Peter.
Yeah.
He was a lawyer who made his way down south years earlier from New Jersey. Together they built a big old family, 9 of them, 9 kids in total.
Oh.
Which included 2 of his sisters that we're going to mention a little bit later that are going to defend his honor, Emily Van Dorn Miller and Octavia Van Dorn Sullivan.
Okay. Octavia's son, Clement Sullivan, he'd later serve under Earl during the Civil War. He started as a captain in the old Confederate forces, worked on Van Dorn's staff, and he was eventually promoted to lieutenant colonel. So the family's military tradition didn't stop with Earl. It spread right through the next generation. Let's take it back to 1838. Young Van Dorn got a pretty big opportunity. Thanks to his mama and her family, the connection to Andrew Jackson, he secured an appointment in the United States Military Academy. And you guessed it, that's at West Point. He wasn't exactly a model cadet, though. When he graduated in 1842, he ranked 52nd out of 68 in his class. Low ranking wasn't because he wasn't smart. It was more to do with discipline. He managed to rack up 163 demerits. Whoa. Mostly for not saluting. And he used tobacco and profanity.
Can't be swearing.
So it's fair to say he wasn't afraid to bend the rules a little.
Just a little.
Just a little.
After graduation, he got his first real assignment. He was appointed as a brevet 2nd lieutenant in the 7th U.S. Infantry Regiment, July 1st, 1842. That marked the start of his Army career, having served primarily throughout the southern United States. December of 1843, Van Dorn got married. His wife, Caroline Godbold, she came from a well-established Alabama planter family. Together they had 2 kids, a son, Earl Van Dorn Jr., he was born around 1855, and a daughter, Olivia, born in 1852, who would sadly pass away in 1878.
Wow. During his early years in the Army, Van Dorn moved around quite a bit. He and the 7th Infantry spent 1842 and 1843 on garrison duty. They did that at Fort Pike, and that was down in Louisiana. After that, briefly stationed at Fort Morgan in Alabama. Later that same year of 1843. He then did more garrison work at Mount Vernon Arsenal in Alabama, 1843 to 1844. Later on in 1844, his orders sent him to Pensacola Harbor. That's down in Florida. He stayed there to 45. During that assignment, he earned a promotion on the 30th of November, 1844. Van Dorn, 2nd lieutenant, officially.
2nd lieutenant.
All right, good for him.
Well, they say he was the kind of man people noticed. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Hitler would have loved him.
Right.
And a natural confidence that seemed to pull attention away to his way wherever he went. His reputation as a ladies' man spread fast, and it's getting in trouble.
Yeah.
It only grew after his military success. First against the Comanche, then later through stories of his courage in the Mexican-American War we'll get to. Historian Arthur B. Carter described him having plenty of chances to mingle in high society. He wrote that Van Dorn was handsome, debonair, and polished. That when he showed up in a Confederate gray coat, he cut a striking figure that instantly drew attention.
Hey, nice, huh? Public gatherings or private parties, he was center of the room. The one everybody wanted to talk to. His charm, refined manners, proper education made him magnetic, especially to women. And by all accounts, he didn't exactly try to discourage the attention. Why would you? New York Times even backed up that impression, writing, "It's true that Van Dorn was enormously attractive to many women. One memoirist wrote that His bearing attracted, his address delighted, his accomplishments made women worship him. Ooh, worship, huh?
He served in the 7th U.S. Infantry, like I said, during the U.S. Army's occupation of Texas from 45 to 46. So right as the old Mexican-American War was breaking out. He was stationed at Fort Texas, which was later called Fort Brown in Brownsville. His job was to help defend the border from the southernmost town in Texas. He first saw serious combat at the Battle of Monterey, which took place September 21st to 23rd, 1846. Then again in the Siege of Veracruz from March 9th to 29th, 1847. Early that year, Van Dorn was transferred to General Winfield Scott's command and promoted to first lieutenant March 3rd.
Nice.
He fought well through the rest of the campaign in Mexico, earning 2 brevet promotions for gallantry.
He was named brevet captain, 18th of April, for his role at the Battle of Cerro Gordo. Later promoted to brevet major, 20th of August, for his actions near Mexico City, which included the battles of Contreras, Churubusco, and the assault at the Belen Gate. His bravery came at a cost, though. He was wounded in the foot near Mexico City, 3rd of September, and then again 10 days later during the storming of Belen Gate on September 13th. After the Mexican-American War, Van Dorn served as an aide-de-camp to Brevet Major General Percifor Smith from April 3rd, 1847 to May 20th, 1848. He and the 7th Infantry were then stationed in Baton Rouge from 48 to 49, and later in 49 they moved to Jefferson Barracks in LeMay, Missouri, just south of St. Louis. In 49 to 50, he's sent to Florida to take part in operations against the Seminoles as the United States attempted to remove them from the region. Jeez.
Some of the Seminoles escaped into the Everglades, where they and their descendants would form the 2 federally recognized Seminole tribes that still exist in Florida today. Van Dorn returned to recruiting service in 50 and 51. Then from 52 to 55, he was stationed at the East Pascagoula Branch Military Asylum in Mississippi, where he served as the first secretary and then treasurer of the post.
Nice.
First as secretary. He spent the rest of 1855 back in New Orleans, doing more recruiting duty before being sent once again to Jefferson Barracks. Jeez, dude.
All right.
March 3rd, 1855, he was promoted to captain in the 2nd Cavalry.
Oh, get to move up, huh? Well, with the 2nd, Van Dorn was assigned to frontier duty, Fort Belknap, in Camp Cooper in Texas. This was from 55 to 56, spending much of that time scouting the northern Texas plains. On July 1st, 1856, he took part in a minor skirmish with Comanche warriors. And from 56 to 57, he was stationed at Camp Colorado, which is in Texas, conducting more scouting missions. And then he returned there again in 57-58 before finally being assigned to Fort Chadbourne in Coke County, Texas in 1858.
Damn, dude.
This dude's all over the fucking place. Damn.
Van Dorn, he continued to see action on the frontier, this time in campaigns against several Native American tribes. He fought separately against Seminoles, many of whom had forcibly relocated to Indian Territory, and later led an offensive against the Comanche, who had been raiding new Native American settlements the United States had promised to protect. Yeah, the Comanches fucked up everybody, dude. Yeah. The U.S. military had long struggled against the Comanche, but Van Dorn's campaign turned out to be one of the few clear-cut victories in that difficult conflict. General David Emanuel Twiggs even described it as a victory more decisive and complete in the history of Indian warfare.
Wow, Van Dorn paid heavy personal price for those successes. While serving in Indian Territory, he was wounded 4 times. The most serious came first expedition against Comanche, Battle of Wichita Village, 1st October 1858. In that very fight, he was struck by 2 arrows. One lodged in his left arm and another in his right side. Ooh, piercing his stomach and lung. Dang. It was bad enough that doctors didn't expect him to live. But somehow he recovered in just 5 weeks. By the spring of 1859, he was back in action, baby.
Wow.
In the stomach?
Yes, and the lung. This time he led...
And they weren't
Poison?
poisoned with poop?
I know. This time he led 6 companies of cavalry and a company of scouts drawn from the Brazos Reservation on another campaign against the Comanche. He tracked down the camp of the chief known as Buffalo Hump in what is now Kansas, in a valley he mistakenly thought was the Nescatunga or the Nessentunga, and attacked on May 13, 1859. Van Dorn's forces killed 49 Comanche, wounded 5 others, and captured 32 women. Yeah, they're about to go take them to Catholic schools.
Right.
After that campaign, Van Dorn was stationed at Fort Mason, Texas through 1859 and 60. While there, he was promoted to rank of major June 28, 1860. Not long after that promotion, he took leave from the Army and remained absent for the rest of 60 and into 61. He said, dude, I've had enough.
Had enough of this bullshit. Van Dorn was at first deeply resistant to the idea of Americans going to war with one another. He genuinely believed that there had to be a peaceful way. There's got to be a peaceful way to resolve this. And he put effort into trying to prevent the conflict from breaking out. Even though he would later align himself with the old Rebs, in the early stages he still held on hope that the crisis could be solved without bloodshed. And we can do this, boys. Well, in hindsight, that optimism came across as a little naive. Van Dorn underestimated just how far things had really been gone.
Yeah, he's out in the country, in the plains, and the prairies and shit. He don't realize what's going on in the cities and the unrest.
Right. And he continued to believe up until the first day of battle, almost stubbornly, that a peaceful solution was still possible, even as the country was already sliding toward war.
But once it became clear that fighting was inevitable, he threw his loyalty behind his home region, as they all did, except for a couple.
Right.
As the war began, Van Dorn joined the Confederate States Army and officially resigned his commission in the U.S. Army, the resignation taking effect January 31st, 1861. Before that, he had already been appointed a brigadier general in the Mississippi Militia January 23rd. Just a few weeks, so he was technically a traitor.
Right.
Traitor!
Yeah.
Just a few weeks later, February, he replaced Jefferson Davis, who had just been selected as president of the Confederacy, and that as a role of Major General and Commander of Mississippi State Forces.
Okay, good for him, right? Well, he held that very position until March 16th, 1861, when he resigned from the Mississippi Militia and immediately entered the regular Confederate Army as a colonel of the infantry. That very same day, he was sent west to organize. He's like, back west?
Right.
He was sent west to organize and command a volunteer brigade under the new Confederate Department of Texas. By April 11th, he had been given command of all Confederate forces in Texas and was ordered to arrest and detain any remaining United States troops in the state who refused to join the Confederacy.
Oh. Leaving New Orleans, April 14th, 1861, he made his way to Matagorda Bay, Texas, where he led his men in one of the first significant actions of the war. April 17th, he successfully captured the Union supply ship Star of the West right in the harbor. But even in this early victory, Van Dorn's goal wasn't bloodshed, it was unity. After taking the ship, he allowed the Union soldiers to keep their firearms, explaining that at the end of the day, they were all Americans.
Right.
The act marked what became known as the first surrender of the war, officially taking place April 17th, 1861.
Look at that shit. Beautiful. Well, however, it also earned Van Dorn some unwanted attention from Washington. Old Abe Lincoln labeled him a pirate under United States law for the seizure of vessels or goods by persons acting under the authority of the Confederate States.
Technically.
Yeah. A few days later, Van Dorn and his forces moved to Indianola.
Is it piracy, though, if it's wartime?
Right. His forces moved to Indianola, where they confronted the last remaining regular United States Army soldiers in Texas. 23rd April, he forced their surrender as well. While stationed at Indianola, he even tried to convince some of the captured Union troops to switch sides and join the old Rebs, but his recruiting efforts mostly fell flat. Not long after that, old Van Dorn was summoned to Richmond.
April 25th, 61, he was appointed a colonel in the 1st Confederate States regular cavalry and put in charge of all the cavalry forces in Virginia.
Oh, that's nice.
His rise through the ranks was fast. He was promoted to brigadier general June 5th, then again to major general September 19th, 1861. Just 5 days later, he was given divisional command of the Confederate Army of the Potomac, where he led the 1st Division until January 10th, 1862. Around that same period, Confederate President Jefferson Davis, he was struggling to find a strong commander for the new Trans-Mississippi District. Like, nobody wants to go out there.
Right. Well, there was two main Confederate generals there, Sterling Price and Benjamin McCulloch. These guys were notorious rivals, and Davis needed someone capable of keeping them in line and building an organized fighting force. First two choices, Henry Heath and Braxton Bragg, both declined, so Davis turned to Van Dorn. So Van Dorn accepted assignment and began heading west again on the 19th of January, 1862. He needed to gather his scattered commands, setting up his headquarters at Pocahontas, Arkansas. He officially assumed command of the Trans-Mississippi District on January 29th, 1862.
Well, by then, Union forces in Missouri had already pushed nearly all Confederate troops out of the state. When Van Dorn took command of the department, he found himself trying to respond to a situation that was already in motion. With an army of about 17,000 men and 60 cannons, they were known as the Army of the West. His plan was ambitious. He wanted to attack and destroy the Union Army, march into Missouri, capture St. Louis, effectively turning the state over to Confederate control. He gathered his forces near the Boston Mountains March 3rd and began moving north the following day to execute his plan. I don't think it would work, though, bud.
Right. Meanwhile, Union Brigadier General Samuel Curtis had brought his 10,500-man army of the Southwest into Arkansas. He was pursuing the retreating Confederates. Wow, we got a pursuer?
Right.
Curtis had 4 divisions, 50 artillery guns, took up a strong defensive position along the Sugar Creek in Benton County. This is in Arkansas. There, on the northern side of the creek, he dug in and fortified, expecting Van Dorn to attack from the south. Well, Van Dorn was smart. He said, you know what? I'm decided against a direct assault on such a well-defended position. Instead, he split his army into 2. One led by Sterling Price and the other by Benjamin McCulloch. He ordered them to march north separately, planning to reunite behind Curtis's lines and hit the Union army from the rear. To move faster, Van Dorn made a fateful decision. He left the supply wagons behind. That choice later proved costly. The march turned into a grueling ordeal. Many Rebs lacked basic gear, some reportedly without shoes. The path slowed further by felled trees blocking the roads. Exhaustion, hunger, and the late arrival of McCulloch's men.
Yeah, go figure. All those delays gave Curtis time to reposition part of his army on March 6th, allowing him to meet Van Dorn's surprise attack from behind. By the time Van Dorn's advance guard had accidentally stumbled into Union patrols near Elm Springs, the element of surprise is long gone. The resulting engagement, now known as the Battle of Pea Ridge, and then too, it would become one of the rare moments in the Civil War where Confederate forces actually outnumbered the Union.
Oh, wow.
Just before taking command, Van Dorn had written to his wife, Caroline, about the pressure he was under, saying, I am now in for it, to make a reputation and serve my country conspicuously or fail. I must not, shall not do the latter. I must have St. Louis, and then huzzah!
After waiting for McCulloch's to arrive, Van Dorn's patience finally ran out. 7th of March, 1862. He decided to move forward with the troops he already had. And around 9 a.m. that morning, he ordered Sterling Price to attack the Union
Around
position.
9 a.m. that afternoon.
Right. He attacked Sterling Price. He ordered Sterling Price to attack the Union position near...
Why is he attacking his own men?
Right. Around 9 o'clock that morning, he ordered Sterling Price to attack the Union position near Elkhorn Tavern. Despite being wounded during the fighting, Sterling Price managed to drive the Union forces back by nightfall, even cutting General Curtis's lines of communication. At the same time, following Van Dorn's order to take an alternate route and push ahead quickly, McCulloch's forces engaged another part of the Union defenses.
Yeah, but that attack fell apart early when both McCulloch and Brigadier General James McIntosh, they were killed, leaving their sector leaderless and in disarray. When Van Dorn heard about the chaos on his right flank, he refused to back down. Then we must press them the harder, he said, urging Price to renew his assault. The Confederates managed to push Curtis's men further back, but by the end of the day, the situation was precarious.
Right.
That night, Price's division finally linked up with the battered remnants of McCulloch's demand. Van Dorn, he took stock of his options. And what do we got here?
Wow.
His army exhausted. Their ammo and supplies are 15 miles away.
Oh, shit.
And the Union army now stood between them and those much-needed resources.
Idiot.
Still, Van Dorn held his ground through the night. Next morning, March 8th, Curtis repositioned his forces into an even stronger defensive line, just about a mile north of their previous position. Van Dorn had his men arranged defensively in front of Pea Ridge Mountain. At first light, he ordered the last of his artillery ammunition to be fired toward the Union line just to gauge their response. What are they going to do if we do this? What do they have?
Right. Well, the Union guns answered immediately and decisively, knocking out most of Van Dorn's remaining artillery. Curtis then counterattacked, routing the old rebels almost entirely through artillery and maneuver. There was little close combat between infantry units. Van Dorn, he ordered a retreat south, pulling his weary soldiers back.
I think he's going to go north.
Right, pulling his weary soldiers back through sparsely populated country for a week, surviving on what little food they can find. Eventually, the Army of the West reunited with its supply trains south of the Boston Mountains. In his official report on the battle, Van Dorn summed up the experience with blunt honesty. I attempted first to beat the enemy at Elkhorn, but a series of accidents entirely unforeseen and not under my control, and a badly disciplined army defeated my intentions. Don't use the voices.
That's amazing. All of these guys, north, south, east, west, even in Britain, they all sound the same country accent.
The death of McCulloch and McIntosh and the capture of Herbert left me without an officer to command the right wing, which was thrown into utter confusion. And the strong position of the enemy the second day left me no alternative but to retire from the contest. Quote, unquote. Historians still debate whether he said it in that tone. Historians still debate the casualty numbers from P. Ridge, as they always do.
Right.
Most estimates suggest about 1,000 to 1,200 men, 1,000 to 1,200 men, Union casualties, and roughly 2,000 Confederate. But Van Dorn's own report told a different story. He claimed Union losses about 800 killed, 1,000 to 1,200 wounded, 300 captured, while his own army, he said, suffered only 800 to 1,000 killed and wounded, and between 200 and 300 captured. So about the same.
No.
Right.
Not at all.
No.
Regardless of the numbers, the Confederate defeat at Pea Ridge is a serious blow. Van Dorn's army was soon ordered east across the Mississippi River to join the Army of Tennessee, leaving Missouri firmly in Union hands and Arkansas exposed with almost no defenses left.
Right.
Still, the Confederate Congress expressed gratitude to Van Dorn and his men, issuing a vote of thanks April 21st for their valor, skill, and good conduct in the Battle of Elkhorn in the state of Arkansas. In his report to Confederate Secretary of War Judah Benjamin, March 18th, he refused to admit defeat, insisting, "I was not defeated, but only foiled in my intentions. I am yet sanguine of success, and will not cease to repeat my blows whenever the opportunity is offered."
Right.
You got defeated, bud.
Yeah. After that defeat at Pea Ridge, Van Dorn regrouped, and he marched his men eastward with the goal of joining General Albert Sidney Johnston's Army of Mississippi. The plan was to consolidate their forces at Corinth, Mississippi, where they could prepare to confront the Union Army's advance up the Tennessee River. Van Dorn's troops crossed Arkansas and then the Mississippi River, but by the time they reached the other side, as always, it was too late. Johnston already fought and died at the Battle of Shiloh. When the long and difficult march finally ended in mid-April, the Army of the West arrived at Corinth, and it was merged into the Army of Mississippi, now under the general command of General Pierre G.T. Beauregard.
Pierre, PGT. Van Dorn's men made up the right flank of the Confederate line during the siege of Corinth that followed. Later that year, he would again take the field in what became known as the Second Battle of Corinth, fought in early October 1862. Just as at Pea Ridge, Van Dorn started out strong. October 1st and 2nd, he combined forces with Sterling Price and positioned his army, which was about 22,000 men, roughly equal in size to the Union force, for an assault on the town. But despite his initial advantage, he failed to properly scout or assess the strength of the Union defenses.
Of course. Wow. He attacked Brigadier General William Rosecrans' heavily fortified positions on the 3rd of October. His troops were met with devastating fire. They saw beaten back with heavy casualties. Very next day, 4th of October, his retreating army hit again along the Hatchie River by Union troops under Brigadier Generals Stephen Hurlbut and Edward Ord. The old Rebs were roughly handled, as one report put it. But Rosecrans didn't follow up aggressively, which allowed Van Dorn and the remnants of his army to escape. The Second Battle of Corinth ended as another costly Union victory.
Well, in this one, the Union suffered 2,520 casualties, 355 killed, 1,841 wounded, 324 missing, while the Confederates lost about 4,233 men, which included 473 killed, 1,997 wounded, and 1,763 captured or missing. Wow. After the battle, Van Dorn ordered a retreat south through Abbeville, Oxford, and Water Valley, Mississippi. December 4th, he and his staff were nearly captured, but they managed to fight off Union cavalry skirmishes as they continued to fall back toward Coffeyville.
Wow.
2 days later, December 6th, he finally stopped the retreat and regrouped his army at Grenada. In the aftermath, Van Dorn faced a court of inquiry about it to explain his decisions at Corinth. Like, what did you do here, bud?
Oh, I was expecting to see Albert Johnston. Dude dead.
Right.
Wow. He was acquitted of all charges, but the damage already done. He was never again trusted with the command of a full army and was soon relieved of his district post. Even so, not everyone viewed his defeat harshly. Jefferson Davis later called the battle an impossibility. He said that Van Dorn had inherited an army full of starving and sick men.
It's your army, Davis.
Right, and then handled an unwinnable situation masterfully. Captain H.E. Stark, who witnessed the battle, he defended Van Dorn as well in a paper he later wrote, calling him the bravest of the brave, the knightly Earl Van Dorn.
Stark argued that the failure at Corinth wasn't Van Dorn's fault at all, but rather the result of General Braxton Bragg ignoring his plans and diverting troops to fight at Iuka.
Yeah, we all know about Braxton Bragg and his terrible decision-making.
Well, that move reduced Van Dorn's army from 30,000 men to maybe about 17,000 before the Corinth campaign even began. Despite those odds, Stark wrote that Van Dorn managed to storm what he called the Gibraltar of Mississippi, defended by 35,000 Union soldiers, some of the best in the entire Federal Army under General U.S. Grant. Stark insisted that Van Dorn's assault was initially successful, captured some key positions, and drove Union troops back into Corinth itself before overwhelming losses forced a retreat. You can only do so much when you're outnumbered 2-1, bud.
You ain't kidding. Nearly half of Van Dorn's men killed, wounded, leaving his army too weakened to hold the captured ground once Union reinforcements arrived. Though the battle ended in a defeat and marked the close of the Confederate campaign in West Tennessee, many contemporaries still saw it as proof of Van Dorn's daring and determination. A costly failure, yeah, but one that reflected the brilliant exploits that defined his turbulent career. In the closing months of 1862, old General Van Dorn played a key role in one of the Confederacy's most creative victories. You got it, the recapture of Galveston, Texas. The operation became a showcase of his tactical imagination, his preference for clever strategy over brute force. As described in Arthur B. Carter's biography, The Tarnished Cavalier, Major General Earl Van Dorn, CSA. Van Dorn, he guided Major General John B. Magruder in using deception to make the old Confederate forces appear far stronger than they actually were. You didn't even have to do that because the Union generals were already thinking it.
His plan relied on a mix of misdirection, psychology, and showmanship. He had troops strategically positioned to give the impression of overwhelming numbers, and he ordered the use of Quaker guns, which were logs carefully painted to look like real cannons, to create the illusion of heavy artillery lining the defenses.
What did the Brits do in World War I? Had inflatable tanks?
That was World War II.
World War II.
That wasn't the Brits. That was Americans. That was actually Patton.
Oh, okay. That was the Brits.
Oh, they used Patton because they thought Patton would be the one to strike, so they gave him a bunch of inflatables.
Right.
But Van Dorn didn't stop there. In a bold psychological move, he arranged for a rider to cross over to the Union side and said, "The Confederates are coming! The Confederates are coming!" No. And he invited a trusted advisor of the Union commander, Colonel Isaac Burrow, to personally inspect the Confederate lines. Okay. Van Dorn guaranteed the men's safety, allowing him to see what he believed was a massive, well-armed force ready for battle. The illusion worked perfectly. Convinced they were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned, the Union forces surrendered the position without a major fight. The victory at Galveston not only demonstrated Van Dorn's ingenuity as a strategist, but also his commitment to achieving military success without unnecessary bloodshed.
Right, you don't need it.
Take a note, Grant.
Right.
It's one of the rare moments in the war where deception and imagination carried the day instead of sheer violence, which reinforced Van Dorn's reputation as both a daring commander and a surprisingly humane one when it came to sparing lives.
I mean, come on, man.
He would have spared him had he had guys.
Right. Van Dorn truly came into his own as a cavalry commander, a role in which he was never defeated and often showed flashes of brilliance. His most famous achievement in that capacity, Holly Springs Raid. It's a daring strike that completely disrupted Grant's first campaign to capture Vicksburg. Van Dorn had been frustrated after being relieved of command by General John Pemberton and was eager to redeem his rep. With Pemberton's permission, he secretly began planning a raid against Grant's army, keeping even his own soldiers in the dark about their mission. Why would you do such a thing?
On December 16th, 1862, Van Dorn led 2,500 cavalrymen out of Grenada, Mississippi, crossing the Yallabusha River, riding northeast under the cover of secrecy. At dawn, December 20th, they descended on Holly Springs, Mississippi, in a surprise attack that caught the Union garrison completely off guard. Van Dorn's men captured 1,500 Union soldiers, including the post commander, Colonel Robert Murphy, and destroyed at least $1.5 million worth of Union supplies. Wow. 600 Union cavalrymen from Illinois managed to escape, but the blow to Grant's army was enormous. When the raid ended, Van Dorn was celebrated by the local citizens, especially the women of Holly Springs, who hailed him as a hero and dubbed December 20th the Glorious 20th.
Oh,
yeah, because they were probably getting
right.
dragged into freaking tents by Union soldiers.
Well, Grant, he hadn't been ignorant of the threat. He had been outmaneuvered. His cavalry had been ordered to keep a 24-hour watch over his supply line. And his own cavalry commander, T. Loud Dickey, had already warned him that Van Dorn had left Grenada heading northeast. And Grant even telegraphed multiple commanders to be on alert, but those warnings went unheeded. Colonel Murphy, despite receiving 2 direct warnings from Grant that Van Dorn was coming his way, he was like, nah, failed to prepare any defenses at all. Fortunately enough for Grant, though, on a personal level, his wife Julia and their son Jesse had already left Holly Springs the night before the raid to meet him in Oxford, missing the attack entirely.
Damn.
While Grant was like, this guy's an idiot. Get your asses over here.
Right. Interestingly, Van Dorn's raid coincided with one of the most controversial orders of Grant's career. Just 3 days earlier, Grant issued General Order Number 11, expelling all Jews as a class from his military district. Because, if you remember our Grant episode, he believed Jewish traders were violating Treasury Department cotton trade regulations.
They were.
Not only that, that was with his daddy.
Yeah.
Stuck his daddy in it, and she.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Confederate raids, Van Dorn's in Mississippi, and another by General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who had already destroyed 50 miles of the Mobile and Ohio Railroad beginning December 10th, wreaked havoc on Union communications and transportation lines. The chaos they caused delayed the enforcement of Grant's order for weeks, sparing many Jewish families from expulsion. Look at that.
After his success at Holly Springs, Van Dorn continued his campaign northward, following the Mobile and Ohio Railroad. He fought an inconclusive skirmish at Davis's Mill, clashed near Middleburg, Tennessee, maneuvered around Bolivar, returned to his base at Grenada by December 28th. The raid restored Van Dorn's reputation, which had suffered greatly after his defeat at the Second Battle of Corinth. Together, his and Forrest's attacks forced Grant to pull his army back to Grand Junction, Tennessee. This is where his troops had to live off the land because their supply lines had been destroyed. Telegraph lines were down, meaning Grant couldn't communicate with General Sherman, who, unaware of the withdrawal, attacked Chickasaw Bluffs on the 29th December and was brutally repulsed.
Twin raids by Van Dorn and Forrest humiliated Grant, but didn't end his career, obviously. Despite the setback, his earlier victories at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, Shiloh, Iuka, and Corinth kept him in Lincoln's favor, I would assume so. However, old Abe did step in to revoke General Order Number 11 after the public outcry it caused.
Yeah.
While Van Dorn's success at Holly Springs derailed Grant's first attempt to take Vicksburg, the Union general would eventually succeed. It was after Van Dorn's death, which we'll get here to shortly, when Vicksburg, we all know, fell July 4th, 1863. 2 years later, Grant reorganized the U.S. cavalry in a distinct and powerful fighting branch under General Philip Sheridan during the Overland Campaign of 65, a move that reflected how important cavalry raids like Van Dorn's had proven to be in shaping the course of the war.
Damn
You
right.
gotta get those cavalry raids, man.
You do. 13th of January, 1863. Earl Van Dorn, given command of all cavalry forces in the Department of Mississippi and East Louisiana. Not long after that, General Joseph Johnston ordered him to move north and join the Army of Tennessee, which was then operating in Middle Tennessee. Van Dorn and his men left Tupelo, Mississippi, passed through Florence, Alabama, reached the main Confederate Army at Columbia, Tennessee on the 20th of February, 1863, setting up his headquarters at Spring Hill in a house known as White Hall. Old Van Dorn.
Sure, they love that.
Right. Old Van Dorn took charge of all the surrounding cavalry. His superior, General Bragg, he tasked him with guarding the left flank of the army, scouting, screening movements, and keeping bluecoats at bay.
Wasn't long before Van Dorn got the chance to show what he could do. March 5th, 1863, he won a sharp engagement at the Battle of Thompson Station. A Union brigade under Colonel John Coburn had left Franklin to conduct a reconnaissance mission to the south. About 4 miles short of Spring Hill, Coburn's men clashed with 2 Confederate regiments. After repelling the initial Union assault, Van Dorn ordered Brigadier General William Hicks Jackson's troops, who were fighting dismounted, to make a direct frontal attack. At the same time, Van Dorn instructed Brigadier General Nathan Bedford Forrest to lead his cavalry around Coburn's left flank and strike the Union rear. The plan worked perfectly. After 3 failed Union charges, Jackson's men finally broke through the front, while Forrest's troopers captured Coburn's wagon train, cutting off the road to Columbia and blocking any chance of a retreat. Low on ammo and completely surrounded, Colonel Coburn was forced to surrender.
Gotta do what you gotta do. Gotta do what you gotta do. Historians, they noted that Van Dorn's performance at Thompson Station reflected how much he had learned from earlier setbacks, like Pea Ridge and Corinth. This time, he kept his cavalry concentrated rather than divided, relied on accurate intelligence, and he also used he also used terrain to his advantage. His battle plan, you ask? Well, it was designed to lure Colburn's force far enough from Franklin to make reinforcement or escape impossible. And guess what? It worked exactly as intended. The victory not only prevented Colburn's brigade from linking up with the Union cavalry under Philip Sheridan, also marked Van Dorn as one of the Confederacy's most promising cavalry leaders. His reputation, already on the mend after Corinth, rose even higher after this success. The contemporary reporter described how, as Van Dorn rode along the column after the strife had ceased, cheer upon cheer greeted him from the enthusiastic soldiery, who under his daring direction had achieved the victory. He is undoubtedly held high at the present moment in the estimation of his forces, and his confidence is well deserved. Good for you, contemporary reporter.
Just a few weeks later, March 16th, Van Dorn was officially placed in command of the entire cavalry corps of the Army of Tennessee. His final battle came less than a month later, April 10th, 1863, at the First Battle of Franklin. There, his cavalry skirmished with Union forces under General Gordon Granger in a brief but fierce engagement. Van Dorn lost 137 men and Granger's roughly 100. Though the fight was minor, it caused Van Dorn to halt his movements and reassess his next steps, eventually pulling back to the Spring Hill area.
Right.
Not long after that battle, tensions flared between Van Dorn and Nathan Bedford Forrest, who criticized Van Dorn's decisions during the campaign. Van Dorn, never one to back down from an insult, challenged Forrest to a duel.
Oh.
Forrest managed to calm the situation. It was whoa, I don't want that.
All right, hold on.
Reminding him they were both far too valuable to the Confederacy to risk killing each other.
Right, idiots.
It's one of the last major moments in Van Dorn's military career, and a glimpse into the fiery, prideful personality that had defined him since the very beginning of the war.
Wow.
And his life.
Well, when it all comes down to it, it wasn't a battlefield that claimed General Earl Van Dorn's life. It was his reputation as a ladies' man. After his victories in Tennessee, Van Dorn made his headquarters in Spring Hill, setting up at the Chiaz mansion, the home of Martin Chiaz. True to his flirtatious nature, he soon became involved in an affair that would prove fatal. The woman, Jessie Hillenkosack Peters, the young wife of Dr. George B. Peters, a respected, loyal physician and state legislator.
He's also a local physician.
Right. Mrs. Peters was nearly 25 years younger than her husband.
Married for money.
And according to locals, often bored during his long absences from home. And it wasn't long before townspeople began to whisper about her frequent visits from Van Dorn and the pair's unchaperoned carriage rides through Spring Hill. The gossip spread quickly, and by the time Dr. Peters returned home on the 12th of April, the whole town was talking. My boy.
When he arrived, Dr. Peters was humiliated. Locals openly mocked him for being a cuckold. Furious, he publicly declared that he would shoot Van Dorn or any member of his staff who dared to step foot on his property. One night, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He hid outside his home and he waited and watched. When Van Dorn inevitably arrived to visit Mrs. Peters, Peters rushed inside and caught the two in an intimate embrace.
Oh, wow.
He pulled his gun and threatened to kill the general on the spot. Van Dorn, cornered and unarmed, begged for mercy, pleading that Mrs. Peters not be blamed or harmed in any way. Dr. Peters agreed, sparing both of their lives that night.
Oh, wow.
The confrontation didn't end the matter. Instead, set the stage for something much, much more darker.
Jeez, oh, Pete. Wow, a few weeks later, morning of the 7th of May, 1863, Dr. Peters rode to Scher's mansion, where Van Dorn still kept his headquarters. The guards at the door recognized him. He often came by to request passes through Confederate lines, and they allowed him to enter without suspicion.
You think if you were Van Dorn, you'd be like, do not let this fucking crazy fuck in here, dude.
Wow. Peters walked straight into Van Dorn's office, where the general sat at his desk. He was writing. Without a word, Peters drew his pistol and shot Van Dorn in the back of the head.
Damn.
Moments later, the Chier's young daughter ran screaming from the house, shouting that Dr. Peters had shot the general. Van Dorn's aides rushed into his office and found him slumped over his desk, still breathing, but unconscious. The wound, mortal. Small caliber bullet had entered the back of his skull, passing through his brain, lodged behind his forehead. He suffered massive brain damage, leading to cerebral herniation and eventual cardiac and respiratory arrest. Van Dorn died about 4 hours later, never regaining consciousness.
Damn. Dr. Peters, he was arrested by Confederate authorities soon after, but was never brought to trial. His defense was simple. He claimed Van Dorn had violated the sanctity of his home.
Back then, that was good enough.
In the South, where the code of honor was deeply ingrained, many saw Peters' act as justified.
Yep.
Across the Confederate ranks, condemnation of Van Dorn was widespread. Brigadier General St. John Liddell, one of Van Dorn's fellow officers in the Army of Tennessee, he summed up the sentiment bluntly. He said there was little sympathy to be had for Van Dorn. Yeah, that was not the whole story. Letters written to his family and eyewitness accounts from his funeral, preserved in A Soldier's Honor by Emily Miller, paints a different picture. Those who knew him personally included many soldiers under his command. They expressed genuine sorrow and respect for their fallen general. I would assume some did.
Right.
Even in death, Van Dorn remained a man of contradictions. Bold and admired, reckless and undone by his own passions. A soldier whose greatest victories and most tragic downfall both came not from war itself, but from the man he chose to be.
Yeah. Eyewitness who attended General Earl Van Dorn's funeral later described the scene in vivid, mournful detail. Said, as we watched the immense procession of soldiers, the hearse drawn by 6 white horses, its gorgeous array of white and black plumes that bore the grand casket in which the dead hero lay, we thought with sorrow of the handsome face still in death, and the heartbroken wife thus cruelly widowed.
I'm pretty sure she's probably pissed at him.
Right. Quote unquote. It was a ceremony of pageantry and grief. They honored a man whose life had burned bright and ended suddenly. Van Dorn's soldiers, especially his cavalrymen, remembered him not only for his charm and recklessness, but for his courage in battle.
One trooper recalled that morning of December 20th during the Holly Springs raid, when Van Dorn sat on his black mare at dawn, holding his hat high above his head as men waited beside him. I thought him as fine a figure as I had ever seen. Another colonel, Colonel Griffith, whose plan Van Dorn had executed perfectly that day, he wrote, felt as if I could charge hell and capture the devil. Right. Even among the chaos of the war, Van Dorn inspired that kind of loyalty. When the news of his death spread, tributes came swiftly. General W.H. Jackson, who had served under Van Dorn at the Battle of Thompson Station, he wrote one of the most moving eulogies. Upon the battlefield, Jackson said, he was the personification of courage and chivalry. Chivalry. No knight of the olden time ever advanced to the contest more eagerly, and after the fury of conflict had passed away, none was ever more generous and humane to the sufferers than he. As a commanding officer, he was warmly beloved and highly respected. As a gentleman, his social qualities were the rarest of order. For goodness of heart, he had no equal. His deeds have rendered his name worthy to be enrolled by the side of the proudest in the capital of the Confederacy, and long will be sacredly and proudly cherished in the hearts of his command.
Oh, that's nice. Good for him. Right?
Revisionist history for you, bud.
All right. But even in his death, Van Dorn's story didn't rest quietly. Rumors and conspiracy theories soon emerged around his killing. Some whispered that Dr. George Peters' motive might not have been jealousy at all, but pure politics. Peters had sworn an oath of loyalty to the United States while serving as a state legislator in Memphis.
Oh.
An act that made him a suspicious figure among Confederate loyalists. After the affair came to light, he divorced his wife.
He had a reason.
Right. After the affair came to light, he divorced his wife, only to reconcile with her years later. Around that very same time, he mysteriously received a large land grant in Arkansas, fueling even more speculation that the shooting might have had more to do with politics than personal betrayal. Van Dorn's sister, Emily, she wrote a memoir defending her brother's reputation, and she insisted that Dr. Peters' allegiance to the Union, not wounded pride, had been the true reason for the murder. Yeah, because otherwise he would have killed him that night.
Okay. Van Dorn's death placed him in a grimly exclusive category. He's one of only 3 major generals in the Civil War to die violently over personal matters. The others were Union Major General William Nelson, they call him Bull, He was shot during a feud with Brigadier General Jefferson C. Davis in 1862.
Wow.
And the other were Confederate Major General John Wharton, who was killed in 1865 after an argument with Colonel George Wythe Baylor. Van Dorn's body was first buried in the family cemetery of his wife's relatives in Alabama, but his sister later arranged for his remains to be brought home. He was reinterred beside his father in Wintergreen Cemetery, Port Gibson, Mississippi, same small town where his story began. Today, his childhood home, the Van Dorn House in Port Gibson, still stands, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a monument to a man remembered as gallant, flawed, and forever entangled in the contradictions of his own legend.
Right. Wow. Throughout his own life, General Earl Van Dorn remained one of the most controversial figures in the Confederacy. A man whose brilliance and flaws existed in equal measure. As a military commander, he was widely regarded as exceptional when leading small to medium-sized units.
Just don't give him anything over medium.
Right, especially the cavalry, where his daring and energy made him nearly unmatched. But when placed in charge of a large mixed force that required intricate coordination, his effectiveness faltered. Military historian David Bongard, he described him as aggressive, brave, and energetic. While the other historian, Richard Weiner, he summed it up more bluntly. He said, he was a brilliant cavalry officer. He was a disappointment in command of large combined forces, though.
Yeah, we know this.
The Mobile Register, published on the very day of his death, praised him as every inch a soldier, and just beginning to reap the reward of public confidence and praise. They also added that his loss will be severely felt in that branch of the service of which he was so complete a master.
Arthur B. Carter, also known to his peers as ABC,
Right.
Van Dorn's biographer and author of the Tarnished Cavalier, he painted a portrait of a man driven by passion, courage, and a love of danger. He wrote that old Earl possessed a fearless and dashing nature, and that during his early career in Texas, he showed remarkable skill as both a cavalry officer and an Indian fighter. I'm an Indian fighter. His true potential, Carter argued, came to light during the Civil War when his leadership in mounted operations, most notably Holly Springs, December of 1862, proved to be invaluable to the Confederacy. Carter believes that by late 1862, Van Dorn had begun to mature as a commander, learning to temper his impatience and better appreciate the value of reconnaissance and intelligence. This evolution was on full display at Thompson Station, when instead of rushing headlong into combat as he once might have, he skillfully drew his unit opponents into an ambush.
No.
He might have grew a little bit better. I don't think that was a reason that there was some conspiracy to take him out.
Right, yeah, I don't believe that. Carter also highlighted the duality of Van Dorn's legacy. His charisma, his charm, made him beloved by many, especially among Texans, who considered him, in the words of British officer Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Fremantle, the beau ideal of a Confederate leader. Yet his personal life inspired just as many detractors. Mississippi Senator Phelan accused him of womanizing and debauchery. Even Carter acknowledged that Van Dorn's fatal flaw was his irresistible attraction to beautiful women.
I love that pussy.
It was a weakness that, quite literally, led to his death.
Other historians shared similar views. John Frederickson described Van Dorn as a brave and capable soldier, but somewhat lacking in administrative ability. He argued that Van Dorn's natural home was with the cavalry, where he was back in his element. Often displayed flashes of brilliance.
Oh.
Frederickson credited his victories at Holly Springs and Thompson Stations as proof that Van Dorn was among the Confederacy's finest cavalry leaders. His death, he wrote, robbed the South of a useful leader at a critical juncture of the Vicksburg campaign, noting that Van Dorn had been the senior major general in the Confederate Army at the time of his assassination.
Beyond the battlefield, Van Dorn was a man of striking contrast. Physically short, but commanding in presence. He was known to be impulsive, emotional, intensely charismatic. He was also an accomplished painter and poet, an artist's soul wrapped into a soldier's uniform. His horsemanship was admired throughout the army. His reputation with women, legendary. One reporter famously called him the terror of ugly husbands. Those who knew him socially said that Van Dorn had an ample opportunity to participate in the social life of the community. Could have describing him as handsome, debonair, and polished, a dashing figure in Confederate gray, and the center of attention at every public and private event.
Van Dorn's larger-than-life persona has continued to capture the imagination long after his death. In 2025, two retards did a podcast on him.
Right. Right.
There was also a historical romance film titled The Legend of Van Dorn, dramatizing the final chapter of his life. Oh, the love story.
Right.
Directed by Shane Stanley and written by Lee Wilson, and also portrayed Van Dorn. Oh, who also played Van Dorn,
Right.
what Lee Wilson did. The film was featured at the Cannes Film Festival. Good for you. Explored both his military achievements and his turbulent personal life, culminating in his assassination. More than a century and a half later, the legend of Earl Van Dorn still endures. A reminder of the soldier who could be both heroic and self-destructive, gallant and reckless. A man forever caught between glory and downfall. That's Earl Van Dorn, revered Confederate cavalry general. Next week,
Probably would have made one hell of a Union general as well.
maybe. Well, we'll be back next week, though, for another Union general.
Somebody.
Oh, man, I feel like it's time to do...
Maybe Joseph Hooker.
It's time to do a Sheridan or a Sherman.
Maybe.
I think.
Nah.
I mean, it's been too long. It's been too long.
Definitely not Sherman.
I mean, Sheridan's story is fucking just long.
Benito Juarez. Señor Doug.
It's not that bad. Maybe we'll do Sheridan next week. Get that guy out of the way. Long overdue, but yeah, that's Earl Van Dorn. So take that what you will. He's a womanizer. Got shot in the back of the head. Was it a conspiracy? Was it not? Did he got killed because he banging chicks, or did he get killed because for some reason they wanted to take him out?
Right.
You be the judge. Leave it in the comments. Eilick. Yeah, with that, we'll be back next week for more. Remember, subscribe, share with your friends, leave a comment, review, like,
Right.
and all that other good stuff. And we're back for more Battles of the American Civil War. Behind the Battles. We'll see you then. Mildly Michigan this week.